Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to give my review of AEW's Dynasty. Starting off tonight, we go into our first match of the night. It is for the Continental Championship. It is Okada versus Pac. I thought it was a great match, man. Back and forth matchup between Okada and Pac, with Pac hitting a Hurricane Rana on Okada in the middle of the ring. Pac then hits an Avalanche Brainbuster on Okada off the top rope. Pac was trying to keep the pace of the match, but Okada hits a drop kick, sending Pac over the top rope to the outside. Okada and Pac both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Okada hitting a drop kick on Pac in the middle of the ring. Okada then hits a DDT off the barricade on Pac that looked absolutely brutal. Pac then gets up, hits a springboard moonsault to the outside, taking out Okada. Okada then gets up, hits an elbow drop off the top rope on Pac. Pac then goes for a black arrow, but missed. Okada hits a tombstone pile driver on Pac. Pac then gets up, applies a brutalizer, but Okada breaks the hold. Pac then hits a tombstone of his own on Okada. Pac then goes for another black arrow, but he missed. And Okada ultimately hits his signature Rainmaker on Pac, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match and still Continental Champion is Okada. Hats off to Okada for getting the win in that matchup. After the match, though, it seemed like Excalibur was on commentary. Well, he was on commentary, but he also said something that I thought was kind of interesting. Again, I could be wrong, but it seemed like he announced that there's going to be another Continental Classic tournament taking place this sometime this winter for the Continental Championship. So if that is true, it's going to be one hell of a tournament. So definitely looking forward to that if that is actually going to be the case. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a 6-man tag team matchup. It is Eddie Kingston teaming up with Adam Copeland and Mark Briscoe versus the House of Black. I thought it was a good match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Eddie Kingston and Brody King exchanging in the middle of the ring. Kingston then hits an enziguri. Kingston, Copeland, and Briscoe were keeping the pace of the match. Mark then hits a senton off the apron to the outside on top of a chair that looked absolutely brutal. Brody King then hits a Death Valley driver on Mark into the barricade that looked absolutely brutal as well. Copeland then hits an impaler. Briscoe then hits a froggy bow off the top rope. Copeland then goes for a spear, but Malachi counters it with a mist spray, if you will. And then Malachi hits the finish, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the House of Black. Hats off to the House of Black for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the TBS Championship. It is Willow Nightingale versus Julia Hart. I thought it was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Willow and Julia, with Willow keeping the pace of the match. Julia Hart then applies a Heartless on Willow, but Willow breaks the hold. Willow then hits her signature powerbomb on Julia Hart, pins her for the 3, and your winner of the match and new TBS champion is Willow Nightingale. After the match, Mercedes Moné comes down to the ring, and it looks like Mercedes Moné's first challenger is going to be Willow at Double or Nothing. Couple things I want to talk about with this matchup, man. Number one, I know a lot of people were actually surprised that Willow was going to actually beat Julia Hart. I wasn't surprised, man. To me, there was a lot of build towards Willow leading up to this match. And I've said it multiple times in the past where Willow has a very high ceiling in AEW. I think Willow has a lot of potential. Now, with that being said, do I think Willow might possibly hot potato that championship to Mercedes? It very much could happen. But speaking of Mercedes, and I mentioned this last week, man, I'm not understanding. I know some people were like, oh, yo, she's injured. But if that's the case, and if Mercedes Moné is injured still from the injury that she sustained in her matchup against Willow at New Japan Strong, one of New Japan Strong's pay-per-views, if that is the case, then why are we continuously keep seeing Mercedes Moné on television cutting promos after promos after promos, and it leads to nothing? That's my biggest thing with Mercedes, and I think the well is starting to run dry with Mercedes because people want to see Mercedes in the ring. We don't need to see Mercedes on Dynamite every single week cutting a promo, whether it be towards Julia Hart or Willow Nightingale. It needs to change, and the well is running dry for Mercedes Moné, in my opinion. Now, am I still excited to see her in the ring? Yeah, but do I want to see her wait to get in the ring until May? I mean, the way that they're looking at it right now is that Mercedes will not step inside that square circle to wrestle until May 26th for Double or Nothing. Now, that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem because my thing is, if that's the case and Mercedes automatically gets a title shot, then the rankings mean, again, absolutely nothing. Because she hasn't even had a damn match yet in AEW. So to me, The rankings are already flawed, number one. Number two, Mercedes hasn't even had a damn match in AEW to even warrant her a title opportunity. She's done nothing. All she's done in AEW so far up to this point is cut countless promos after promos after promos that are only talking about Julia Hart or Willow Nightingale. It's the other reason why I truly believe that Willow was going to win this match, because the storyline writes itself between Willow and Mercedes Moné, because the last time we saw Mercedes wrestle was against Willow, where Mercedes sustained an ankle injury that almost ended her career. So the writing was on the wall for Willow to beat Julia Hart and become the new TBS champion. But like I said, the issue that I have with it is that you're automatically going to, slot Mercedes into a title opportunity when she has not even yet had a match in AEW. So that's my biggest thing with Mercedes right now. I think she's a great addition to the roster, but again, it's still yet to be seen what she can do inside the ring, since she has not wrestled since she's been with AEW since March. So, I mean, again, it's still yet to be seen what Mercedes can do inside that square circle in AEW. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the International Championship. It is Kyle O'Reilly versus Roderick Strong. I thought it was a great match, man. There's a lot of history here between, obviously, O'Reilly and Strong, obviously from their times at NXT as Undisputed Era, which was a phenomenal stable in NXT. And obviously they had matches all over the world against each other in PWG and stuff like that. So it made for a great match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between O'Reilly and Strong, with O'Reilly landing multiple kicks on Strong. O'Reilly and Strong then both exchanged in the middle of the ring, but Strong was trying to keep the pace of the match. O'Reilly then lands a combo on Strong. Strong then gets up, hits an angle slam on O'Reilly. O'Reilly then gets up, hits a knee drop off the top rope on Roderick Strong. Strong then gets up, hits a jumping knee strike on O'Reilly. Wardlow is here. He tries to cause a distraction with the referee, but it does not work. O'Reilly then hits a brainbuster on Roderick Strong. Strong then gets up, hits the finish on O'Reilly, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match and still international champion is Roderick Strong. After the match, you can see on the stage Adam Cole with Matt Taven and Mike Bennett. He comes out in the wheelchair, but Adam Cole actually stands up and he walks down to the ring. So it looks like Adam Cole is getting healthy, and he looks like he might be ready to go and return back into the ring, which would be absolutely awesome. He's definitely missed in the wrestling capacity. But the one interesting thing I'll take away from this is when Wardlow was in the ring, Cole got into the ring, and you can see Cole kind of stare down Wardlow, with Wardlow not even knowing what the hell's going on. So it looked like Cole was really pissed off with Wardlow, especially due to the fact that Wardlow did not secure the win over Samoa Joe in their title match that happened, I believe it was about a month ago, and Wardlow again came up short. So it looks like Cole has some hostility towards Wardlow, and I mentioned this multiple times in the past too, man, as far as Undisputed Kingdom. I do believe Wardlow is on his way out, especially with Undisputed Kingdom as well as AEW. I just think there's nothing more left for Wardlow to do in AEW. I think, in the next few weeks we can see Wardlow possibly getting kicked out of the Undisputed Kingdom. But all in all, man, it was a solid match between O'Reilly and Strong, and hats off to Strong for getting the win in that matchup and retaining the International Championship. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. Is for the FTW Championship. It is Hook versus Chris Jericho. I thought it was a good match. It wasn't a bad match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Hook and Jericho. Hook and Jericho then both exchanged in the middle of the ring, with Hook hitting a T-bone suplex on Jericho. Hook was trying to keep the pace of the match. Hook then hits Jericho with a trash can lid on the outside. Jericho then gets up, hits a DDT on Hook on top of the trash can lid. Hook then gets up, hits a T-bone suplex off the apron through a table on Jericho that looked absolutely brutal. Jericho then gets up, hits a Hurricane Rana off the top rope on Hook. Jericho then hits a code breaker on Hook as well. Jericho then applies the walls of Jericho, but Hook breaks the hold. Jericho then hits 2 Judas effects on Hook for a near fall. And then Jericho ultimately hits Hook with the baseball bat, knocks Hook out, pins him for the 3. And your winner of the match and new FTW champion is Chris Jericho. Couple things I want to talk about with this match too, man. Number one, was this match needed? Hell no. To me, this match could have honestly been on the 0 hour, to be honest with you. I would have swapped the 6-man tag team matchup to unify the championships on the main card, and then put Hook and Jericho on the 0 hour. I know it might be a hot take, but Jericho, and I mentioned this multiple times with Jericho, I appreciate what Jericho's trying to do in the aspect of trying to bring up younger talent and get the spotlight on younger talent. But Jericho, I feel like the well has run dry with Jericho and AEW. I'm not saying Jericho needs to go back to WWE or anything else like that, but I'm thinking, storyline wise and stuff like that, it just the well has run dry with Jericho. There's no more Pinnacle. I mean, not Pinnacle. There's no more JAS. There's no more Inner Circle. It's a done deal, man. And Jericho, I feel like he's just fighting for a TV spot at this point, and it's just not needed. Even to a point where a lot of the fans were chanting at Jericho and booing Jericho, telling Jericho to just go home. And fans are really tired of seeing Chris Jericho, and myself included. There's no disrespect towards Jericho, but I feel like Jericho, has done everything he possibly could up to this point in AEW, and the well has run dry at this point. There's nothing really left for Jericho in AEW, in my opinion. Now, with Hook, there's a couple interesting things to me that I thought of when he lost this matchup against Jericho. Now, number one, I know it's been speculated for the past couple weeks that Hook is willing to entertain free agency, whether that be TNA, New Japan, or if possible WWE. And this could be another reason why he dropped the belt to Jericho. Now, if Hook decides to test free agency, then it is what it is. Do I think Hook would do well in NXT? Yes. I think if I was Hook and Taz and I was going that route and putting Hook in free agency to go to WWE, then obviously NXT would be the best bet for Hook. Obviously, there's still things that Hook needs to work on. His wrestling, obviously his promos, and NXT and Shawn Michaels can really help Hook with those credentials, if you will, or those skills as far as him being a professional wrestler. So there could be another reason why Hook possibly dropped the belt to Jericho last night at Dynasty, because possibly Hook is going to actually entertain the idea of testing free agency and see where he could possibly go. He could stay with AEW, or he could go to WWE. It's very possible. So, again, I'll give you guys more details on that once I find out more information about Hook when it comes time for him to test free agency. But hats off to Jericho for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the AEW Women's Championship. It is Thunder Rosa versus Toni Storm. I thought it was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Rosa and Storm, with Storm keeping the pace of the match. Rosa then hits a powerbomb on Storm. Rosa then hits a devastating Death Valley driver off the apron on Storm that looked absolutely brutal. Rosa and Storm then both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Rosa hitting an enziguri on Storm. Storm then gets up, hits a hip attack on Rosa in the corner. Storm then hits a Storm Zero on Rosa for a near fall. Storm then applies a Texas Cloverleaf, but the hold is broken. Storm then hits a low blow on Thunder Rosa, which allowed her to hit another Storm Zero on Thunder Rosa. Pins her for the 3, and your winner of the match, and still AEW Women's Champion, is Toni Storm. Hats off to Toni Storm for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's a pretty much dream match, a match that I never thought we would actually end up seeing, but we actually saw it last night. It is Will Ospreay versus Bryan Danielson. This was a legendary matchup, a great match. The match itself was a back-and-forth matchup between Ospreay and Danielson, with Ospreay and Danielson both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Ospreay hits a Hurricane Rana on Danielson, but Ospreay was trying to keep the pace of the match. Danielson then lands kicks on Ospreay. Ospreay then gets up, hits a handspring Pele kick on Danielson in the middle of the ring. Ospreay then hits a springboard forearm, taking out Danielson. Danielson then gets up, lands elbow strikes on Will Ospreay. Ospreay then hits a Tyler driver on Bryan Danielson. Danielson then gets up, hits an avalanche tiger suplex on Will Ospreay that looked absolutely brutal. Danielson then lands multiple yes kicks on Ospreay. Ospreay then hits another tiger driver, if you will. Ospreay then hits a hidden blade off the apron. Looked absolutely brutal. Ospreay then hits a powerbomb on Danielson, but Danielson gets up, applies a label lock on Ospreay, but the hold is broken. Danielson then hits a running knee for a near fall. Danielson applies a triangle on Ospreay, but Ospreay counters it with a Styles Clash. Ospreay then hits a hidden blade on Bryan Danielson. Ospreay then goes for an Oz Cutter, but Danielson counters it with a running knee. Ospreay then hits a Tyler driver that looked absolutely brutal and pretty much could have injured Bryan Danielson pretty badly. And then Ospreay hits another hidden blade on Bryan Danielson, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Will Ospreay. Hats off to Will Ospreay for getting the win in this matchup. And like I said, it looked like Bryan Danielson actually was injured in this match. There was medical staff attending to Bryan Danielson as well as Will Ospreay to figure out what was going on with Bryan Danielson. But hats off to Will Ospreay for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is FTR versus the Young Bucks for the AEW Tag Team Championships in a ladder match. I thought it was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between FTR and the Young Bucks, with FTR trying to keep the pace of the match. Nick Jackson then hits a senton off the apron. Cash Wheeler then hits a moonsault off the ladder. Young Bucks then hit an EVP trigger. Dax then hits a slingshot powerbomb. Nick Jackson then hits a hurricanrana off the apron. FTR hit a shatter machine in the middle of the ring. Nick Jackson then hits a 450 off the top through a table on Wheeler. Dax then hits a pile driver on the ladder. Looked absolutely brutal. Then all of a sudden a masked wrestler enters the ring. He attacks Dax, pushes him off the ladder, which allowed the Young Bucks to get the win and become the new AEW Tag Team Champions. Now, the person who was underneath the mask was none other than the scapegoat, Jack Perry. Jack Perry returns to AEW since his last match that he had in August at All In. But hats off to the Young Bucks for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of AEW Dynasty. It is for the AEW World Championship. It is Samoa Joe versus Swerve Strickland. I thought it was a good match, man. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Joe and Swerve, with Joe keeping the pace of the match. Joe then hits a devastating power slam on Swerve on the exposed concrete floor. Joe and Swerve then both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Swerve hitting a rolling cutter on Joe. Joe then gets up, hits a muscle buster on Swerve for a near fall. Swerve then gets up, hits a swerve stomp on Joe for a near fall. Joe applies a submission hold on Swerve, but the hold is broken. Swerve then hits a house call for a near fall. And then Swerve ultimately hits another swerve stomp on Samoa Joe. Pins for the 3, and your winner of the match and new AEW World Champion is Swerve Strickland. Hats off to Swerve for getting the win in this matchup. A couple things I want to talk about, man, as far as Dynasty is concerned. Do I think Dynasty was the best AEW pay-per-view that they've had so far? No. But I will say this. Tony Khan is becoming Mr. Pay-Per-View. There's been countless times where, when AEW pay-per-views come around, man, they're absolute bangers. The biggest match, obviously, was Will Ospreay versus Bryan Danielson. It was a legendary matchup, like I told you guys earlier. It was a matchup that I never thought we would see. And I think it was a tall task for both men, for both Ospreay and Bryan Danielson. Ospreay, has had so far a hell of a career, as well as Bryan Danielson. And, Danielson, to me, was one of those guys where, and he even mentioned himself, that I don't think he'll ever retire. I don't think Danielson would ever retire. I think, obviously he's going to, after this year, he's not going to work a full-time schedule, but Danielson is not going anywhere. He's still going to wrestle, but more or less on a part-time basis, and still be a part of AEW for the foreseeable future, which is absolutely awesome. And so far, he's having one hell of a tour with AEW, having these dream matches, man. They've been absolutely awesome. The other interesting thing to take away from that match was the injury, possibly, or it could be storyline based, not sure, that Bryan Danielson sustained in that matchup against Ospreay with that, I believe it was a Tiger driver that Ospreay delivered on Danielson that kind of injured Danielson's neck. So again, you got to keep an eye on that and see how Bryan Danielson is doing. So definitely looking forward to that. The other takeaways I took away from last night, Willow Nightingale and Julia Hart. I mentioned this earlier in the podcast that, to me, the writing was on the wall for Willow to beat Julia Hart. Julia Hart's done a fantastic job carrying that TBS championship. And to be honest with you, with all due respect to all the members of House of Black, I feel like she's the most noticeable one in that entire stable, because she's being, the one that's being more shown in that stable. And she's done a hell of a job defending that belt. But this was Willow's time. And if Mercedes Moné was looking to challenge the TBS champion, to me, the writing was on the wall for Willow to beat Julia Hart and have this rematch between Willow and Mercedes Moné. But like I told you guys earlier, my standpoint on Mercedes is the same. I think Mercedes is a household name. I'm not taking anything away from Mercedes Moné. The body of work that she's put in has been flawless. I mean, she has had a hell of a career up to this point, but the well is starting to run dry as far as, people starting to not really care that much about what Mercedes Moné is going to do next. And if Tony Khan knew that she was injured or was not medically cleared, we do not need to see Mercedes Moné on TV every single week. And I think because of that, the well has run dry. A lot of people are not going to be fully invested in what Mercedes Moné is going to do. And as far as I'm concerned, the ranking system is 100% flawed, man. They hyped up this, new rankings, new rankings. It doesn't mean absolute shit. It means nothing. Because, prime example, Mercedes automatically gets a title opportunity when she hasn't even had a damn match yet in AEW. That's a problem. And the ranking system is flawed. And obviously the other big thing from last night was the return of Jack Perry. Now, obviously there was a lot of speculation about Jack ever since the All-In footage was shown last week on Dynamite, and it was shown by the Young Bucks, the backstage altercation that happened between Phil Brooks, a.k.a. CM Punk, and Jack Perry. And a lot of people at that point were speculating, when is it going to be the time that we're going to see Jack Perry? And we ended up seeing Jack Perry last night get involved in that ladder match between FTR and the Young Bucks. And it looks like Jack Perry is making his way back into AEW. Now, we don't even know how this is going to go. We have no idea if the fans are even going to like seeing Jack Perry back, or he's going to constantly and continuously get booed out of the building due to the fact that CM Punk is no longer with AEW because of the incident that CM Punk had with Jack Perry backstage at last year's All In. So we don't know how this is going to play out. This is going to be something that could be really beneficial to Jack, or this is going to be something else, again, that will be very detrimental to AEW and Tony Khan. It could go either way. So to me, as a fan, was it great to see Jack? Yeah, I've said it from day one. I think the punishment did not fit the crime of what happened at the backstage incident between Jack Perry and Phil Brooks. No. I think Tony Khan got very upset with Jack because of the altercation. Jack took the punishment, and CM Punk did not get fired from AEW. CM Punk walked out and quit AEW, but Tony Khan wanted to save face and tell the entire world that he was fearful of his life and ended up having to fire CM Punk. I don't feel like that was the case, and I stand behind that. I think Phil Brooks finally said, you know what, the hell with this, I'm done, I quit. And just so Tony Khan could save face, he went on national television on Dynamite and announced that he had no other choice but to fire CM Punk due to the fact that he was fearful of his life. And he was accident prone, and it was causing issues backstage with other talent. I think, and I told you guys this before when it pertains to CM Punk when he came back after the incident with the Young Bucks, was the juice worth the squeeze? Obviously not. Because it didn't pan out for Phil Brooks, it didn't pan out for AEW, and it didn't pan out for Tony Khan. Clearly. The other big thing as well, the biggest thing that I took away from last night was Swerve Strickland. And I have a lot of praise for Swerve. I think Swerve was one of those talents in AEW that was severely, severely underrated. And he finally gets his just due by beating Samoa Joe and becoming the new AEW World Champion. But not only the AEW World Champion, but the first African American to win the AEW World Championship. And that is a very big deal and a very big milestone, not only for AEW and the company, but also Swerve Strickland himself. The guy has busted his ass since he's been with AEW, and he's done a fantastic job with every single match that he's had. And the body of work that he's put in during his duration and his time in AEW definitely warranted him to win this championship. And I can't, be more happy for Swerve. I know a lot of people were kind of upset that Swerve possibly won, which I have no idea why. I guess basically because Samoa Joe didn't have that much of a title reign. But this was Swerve's time. This was Swerve's time to win the championship, win the belt, defend the belt. And it was just time, man. Swerve was definitely over with the crowd, with the help of Prince Nana and stuff like that, and the entrance music and everything else like that. The crowd was constantly behind Swerve. Whether he was trying to be a babyface or be a heel, the crowd really did support Swerve. And speaking of crowd, man, the crowd last night in St. Louis, wow. You guys, hats off to the fans of St. Louis last night that were in that arena during the show. The crowd was insane during the Ospreay-Danielson match as well as the Swerve and Joe match, man. The crowd was absolutely incredible. So hats off to the fans in St. Louis that showed up last night at Dynasty and made for a fantastic show last night. But like I mentioned earlier, man, Swerve, I have a lot of praise for Swerve, and I'm happy that Swerve finally gets his just due and finally became the new AEW World Champion. And I think he's going to do a fantastic job defending that belt. I really do. Swerve, He's great on the mic. He cuts great promos, and the stuff that he does inside that ring is incredible. Absolutely incredible. I wouldn't even mind seeing Swerve versus Will Ospreay. I think it'd make for a fantastic match, not only for us fans, but for AEW and having people tune in to AEW, man. I think it'd be a great match to see between Ospreay and Swerve Strickland. So I'm absolutely all for that. But this was Swerve's night, and I'm very happy for Swerve. And it was well overdue for Swerve to walk out with the AEW World Championship. So I'm happy. I'm excited for Swerve. I'm excited for what's going to happen next. I'm excited for Dynamite this week, man, and what's going to happen next. We're going to be live from Jacksonville, pretty much the home of AEW. So, what's going to happen next? Who's going to be the first challenger for Swerve's AEW World Championship? Is Joe going to get a rematch, or are we going to get a return of possibly MJF and kind of have MJF versus Swerve kind of feud leading up to a match between those two for the AEW World Championship that will take place at Double or Nothing? Who knows, man? Are we going to see some returns? Are we going to see Kenny Omega? Are we going to see MJF? Are we going to see Adam Page? Obviously, there's a lot of history there between Page and Swerve, and now that storyline, again, might pick up now that Swerve is a champion. And obviously, there's heat there between Page and Swerve that they can really build off of leading up to Double or Nothing. I mean, there's a lot of questions that still need answers. And to be honest with you, I think, last night, Tony Khan once again hit it out of the park with these pay-per-views. He did a fantastic job last night. And hats off to Tony Khan. Hats off to Swerve for becoming the new AEW World Champion. And I definitely look forward to what's going to happen next with Swerve now that he is the current AEW World Champion. But like I told you guys, man, there's a lot of things going on with AEW. I know a lot of people were like, oh, well, AEW is going to go back to what it used to be, and now they're not going to do anything and not build storylines. I feel like they can't do that anymore. I feel like now that everything kind of changed last night, Willow's a new champion, Swerve's a new champion, they're going to start building storylines up for those next challengers and start slowly building up to those next, matches leading up to Double or Nothing. So hopefully, and I mean hopefully, Tony Khan does build more storylines into AEW. Now, I also know, too, that, like I told you guys, and I said this last week, that there was a lot of speculation about Motor City Machine Guns joining AEW. That's still a possibility. From what I understand, they were finalizing a deal with AEW. The reason why they didn't show up on Dynasty is I think they had other obligations to do that night, and that was one of the main reasons why they didn't show up at Dynasty last night. But from what I have been told, it's almost a done deal that Motor City Machine Guns will possibly be joining AEW. It's just a matter of time. And like I told you guys earlier, from what I've heard, they were finalizing a deal with AEW here, I believe it was last week. So we very much could see both Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley possibly showing up in AEW here in the near future, which would be a great addition to the roster and a great addition to the tag team roster that AEW currently has right now. So I'm all for it, man. I think, AEW is firing on all cylinders, especially what happened last night. And I think as fans, we need to really take in and enjoy the fact that we saw one hell of a match last night between Bryan Danielson and Will Ospreay, man. That's a match that no one ever thought they were going to see. And Tony Khan was the guy to make that happen and deliver this match to the fans. And it was one hell of a match. And I mentioned this last week in my last show, man, that I truly believe, Will Ospreay will eventually be, if not is now, the ace of AEW. And it's not me having a lot of praise for Will Ospreay, but every single match I've seen Ospreay in have been absolutely incredible. The match they had with Takeshita, fantastic match. Probably candidate for match of the year. But now it's a close tie here between that match and the match that Ospreay just had last night with Bryan Danielson as candidate for match of the year. But with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Dynasty. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful and remember